Mm-hmm.
All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the internet. Welcome to our weekly interview and concert series. If you're new to our programming, my name's Kareem Candy, and this is part of the Kareem Candy World Orchestra's weekly performance and interview series that we're doing. And today we're very happy to have the wonderful, world-renowned composer and performer and educator, and I was very fortunate to have him as a teacher for a few years at Cornish College of the Arts, the great Jovino Santos Neto. Jovino, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Kareem. It's a pleasure to be here, and hello, everybody, wherever you are. There you are.
Yes. Well, as with all of our viewers, I'm sure many viewers know you and your work, and I'm sure many possibly don't. So can you talk a little bit about how you got started playing music?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was born in Brazil, so I'm from Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And it's a very musical culture, so you are always immersed in really cool things happening that you don't realize at the time, because it's like the fish realize in the water, you know, it's all around you. But I've always liked music, but I've always liked a lot of other things as well. So my goal was really to become a scientist. What I wanted to become was really, I don't know exactly what kind, I started to study all kinds of things, but eventually I settled on biology. All the time I was into music. I started playing when I was like 12 years old, taking private piano lessons with a teacher. So she taught me some very basic things, but enough to decode the language of music. Like I could actually, let's say if I as a kid, I would go to watch a film and I really liked the film and I said, oh, I can actually get the music for that. And also, so it was a combination of learning very rudimentary, very basic reading, but also developing the ears, because a lot of the music that I was getting into at the age of 14, 15, you know, listening to rock and roll and Beatles and Rolling Stones, that kind of thing, there was no way to get sheet music for that in those days. So I was very lucky that my father had a little tape recorder, little reel-to-reel thing, Sony. So I figured out a way, kind of like hacking it myself, just kind of unplugging things. I figured out a way that I could plug in my battery radio and record from the battery radio into the tape recorder. I still don't know how I did it, but it worked. Some kind of wiring thing worked out. So whenever there was on the radio song that I liked, I could go, oh, choop, and I could record it. And then I could put it next to the piano and start playing the music back, then try to figure out how it happened, which gave me a lot of time to develop, like the ears, transcribing literally without writing, but learning the songs by playing along with the recording. So that helped a lot. I was probably 16 when I joined the first band in Rio, and playing, you know, the old organ that gave me shocks. It was an old electric. Maybe that explains a lot. But so I went to study biology. I went to college in Rio and eventually to Canada. I went to Montreal to study McGill University, and I got a degree in biology there, all the time playing music. So I had bands in Montreal. I played with some really cool musicians that got me the first taste of jazz and playing with jazz musicians. So I learned a few things that were really cool and really into music, but I couldn't see myself working as a professional musician. The scene was not very healthy, you know, having to go to bars and clubs and everybody smoking cigarettes. So that kind of thing turned me off, and I said, if my life is going to be this, I'm not going to be very motivated, because most people who are in these places were not there for the music. They were there for whatever. So I decided to go into my postgrad work in biology then, and left Canada, went back to Brazil. The plan was to go do my master's degree at the Research Institute of the Amazon, in the Amazon forest in Brazil. And I went. But the thing is, when I landed in Rio, it turns out that the amazing musician Hermeto Pascoal had recently moved to Rio, and he was living in a neighborhood very close to where my parents lived. So just out of pure curiosity, I went to his house just to know him. I wasn't thinking of getting a gig or anything. But I knocked on his door, and he was so kind to me, and he actually right there, point blank, asked me if I wanted to play a gig with his band, like in a few days. And I go, oh, but wait, I cannot do this, I have plans, I have to do all these things. Says, no, you just play this one, and then you can go ahead and do your things, because I need a keyboard player. He's an amazing keyboard player. If you guys don't know Hermeto Pascoal, he's a legendary musician. His music was recorded by Miles Davis, and he's renowned all over the world as being like a real musical genius. He's albino and he's very different looking. So I got myself involved with Hermeto. I played one gig, then I played another one, then I played another one. I never went to my master's degree in biology. And that was the beginning of a 15-year apprenticeship in which we rehearsed every day. So it was like a real full-time job in which every afternoon for 6 hours we would rehearse. And then we'd go play concerts and do tours, and we made a whole bunch of records. So 15 years of that was, in a way, my doctorate, postgraduate, postdoctorate, everything, because the number of hours that we spent learning music from such an amazing musician formed my musical life for the rest of my life until today. And I'm very grateful for having had that opportunity. And I share a lot of that music that came through me, from Hermeto to me, with my students, with the people I play with. So I moved to Seattle in 1993, so it's been now going to be 28 years. And immediately connected with the music community here, including Cornish College of the Arts. Chuck Dearduff, he actually auditioned me to come to Cornish. I came to Cornish as a student, as a conducting student. And but within 2 months, with the band, we were already rehearsing, creating, inspired me to write a lot of music. Mark Ivester, Hans Stoiber in the beginning, eventually Jeff Bush joined us too, and more recently Ben Thomas. So these are musicians that I have been playing with since I got here. So we developed a beautiful, I feel very much now after all these years, I feel that I'm really a Pacific Northwest webbed feet, you know. And it's a really great opportunity. That includes you, to meet musicians like you who are so creative and are always finding new ways to do things. So I'm very inspired. I'm very happy living here. I enjoy the weather, I enjoy the people, I enjoy the food. So it's a good place.
Well, and you do a lot of traveling and, artists in residence, positions at different places and touring prior to COVID, and I'm assuming eventually we'll get back to that too. Mm-hmm. But, now you call Seattle your home, but you still do quite a bit of traveling and touring, and you have, what's the word I'm looking for? Commissions to do different pieces and projects for things. So, I mean, besides just teaching and playing here locally, you're still a world traveler and doing a lot of very busy things.
Even during the pandemic, I've been in residence, quote unquote, at the Guildhall School in London, where I did a whole series of workshops. I teach. I've done. Actually, it's interesting because I am from Brazil, but I had never really connected with the music schools in Brazil, the universities and so. And now I am. Yeah. I've been an advisor for graduate students in the Federal University, people who are doing their work on Hermeto Pascoal. I'm considered to be kind of like a reference, because I'm also the curator for the Hermeto Pascoal archive of compositions, which includes thousands and thousands and thousands of pieces from everything from symphony orchestra, big band, the string quartet, our ensemble, which was really powerful, rehearsing like we did. So we had a really highly energetic, to the point that nobody knew what was improvised and what was written. So for me to keep this material available for the following generations, it's really important. So that's part of the work that I do. When I'm not teaching and playing, composing, I'm kind of like digging into this mountain of music and taking like the ant that moves the mountain from one place to another, just moving like little pebbles. So, but it's like a learning. So I am still studying music. I just recently worked, so that I also have to do a lot of transcription from live recordings, because a lot of this music was never recorded. And I don't have all the parts, I only have the piano, so I have to listen. What is the baritone sax doing? And kind of like try to extract this music and assemble this body of work that I believe to be one of the most important in the world.
Well, aside from that, I mean, I remember this was around when I was a Cornish graduate in 2002, but I was able to both have private lessons with you and then take the Latin ensemble. Mm-hmm. But even at that time, I recall, besides doing that work, you were composing. And still, I know from circles of musicians, you still compose all the time. You're one of those people that are constantly writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think composing is something that you don't have to wait for like a strike of lightning, something to come and I have this amazing. You can start composing anytime because there's always something happening if you pay attention to it. So, and a lot of people don't realize that because musicians, the first thing that they ask musicians is like, oh, what are your musical influences? Who do you listen to? And of course, I listen to a lot of music, but I think that music is a reflection of the world. So I get inspired to make music from a fruit or a person that I meet or a place that I go to or a mountain that I see or the ocean. So all those things are potential inspirations, which you translate into music. So it doesn't have to, like if you're a painter, even though you study the works of other painters, you go outside and put your canvas out there and look at the world and reflect it with your own vision. So I believe that music is also this way. You look at the world and you reflect it with your own mission. Everything that you think it's important, the things that are crucial, you transmit that in the music. And in my case, because I'm not really a lyricist, I do that without words. So which gives a much wider latitude for people to apprehend it beyond languages.
Well, I think that's very well put. I think it's, you could say that the same thing of like a photographer or a painter or a choreographer, whatever their medium is, they choose to do that. But I guess what I would say is if you look at an artist like someone like Chet Baker, he didn't write a lot of original compositions. He played a lot of great improvisations, but he didn't write a lot. And I could say the same thing about a lot of the artists here in the Northwest. There are some very fine musicians and artists, but they don't write a lot. Your body of work is massive, and you continue to write every day, which I think is very impressive. And I'm curious, do you think part of that is because of your association with Hermeto and the way that he worked and doing those daily rehearsals and just being around that kind of mindset?
Absolutely. That's a really good point because Hermeto made sure he composed in so many different ways. Like he could just show up at the rehearsal with the score that he just prepared, and or just a lead sheet. Or he could just show up at the rehearsal, start playing something randomly at the piano, and I'm looking over his shoulder. So actually, you see the music kind of like bubbling up at the source. So just to see that, the first thing you realize is, number one, imitation doesn't work. Say, I'm going to do exactly that, doesn't work, because it's never going to be exactly the same, and it's useless. I mean, he's such a genius writing, but the inspiration says, if he can do that, I can do that my own way. I mean, Hermeto has his own influences. I have my own, which is different. I grew up in a different generation than he did. But still, the inspiration to create spontaneously music, it's kind of like improvising. It's just the only difference is that you actually notate it so it can be played later. The improvisation, you do that, but where the music comes from, it's not from a different reservoir. It's from the same giant reservoir of music that there is. So if you attune your antennas to that and you acquire the basic elements of harmony, rhythm, knowing the grooves of the world, understanding how beautiful, because that's one thing that it really, like say, the GPS of music is rhythm. Like you go to Rio and there's a hill in which they play the samba in a certain style. And you move 1 mile to another hill, and there's already, the snare is different. So you can be that detailed. The music can pinpoint a geographic location with an amazing precision. And then there's the stuff that's universal, like harmony, melodies. They float around. They're not attached to the ground. Rhythm comes from the earth. So the ability to combine those things, you can create virtually anything you want. And the thing that I learned from Hermeto is that to see music as compartmentalized, which I understand the need for that. If I had a record store, I probably would, they don't exist anymore, but if I did have a record store, I probably would need some bins, because otherwise all the records would be in a pile on the floor. People say, oh, to buy a record. Oh, go there. There's 200,000 CDs. You're just kind of like pick at random. So that doesn't really work. So for some kind of librarian work, for some kind of a cataloging, you need to have some. But when you're making music, oh no. If I'm going to start to make music, what are you going to compose? I said, I don't know. It's whatever comes. And something might come up as a waltz and become like something totally different afterwards. So the music, when it comes, you learn how to respect the intuition. And intuition is fast. It won't wait. It'll say, oh, I'm driving my car, I have this amazing idea. Oh, I'll wait until I get home and then, no. It's like giving you an option. Say, take it or leave it. If you don't take it.
I've read, I can't remember who it is now, I've forgotten, but I think it was Beethoven or Mozart, but one of those guys back in the day, they'd go on a daily walk and they would take a little piece of paper and a pencil, and if they had a thought, instead of like writing out the music, they would just write a picture of whatever it was that they were thinking to remind them of. Now in 2021, we all have our phones, so when I'm, out and about and I hear something, I'll just sing what the thing is on my phone so I can keep it for later.
Absolutely.
Something similar. Because I don't want to lose that. I know that if an hour goes by and I think of something else, it's going to be gone.
It's like, it's a real ephemeral thing. It's a flash. And it goes by and it hangs enough for you to want it. But if you say, oh, no, it's okay. I mean, basically what we learn as you become more mature as a composer is that there are no bad ideas. Because sometimes I used to have this idea and I say, nah, that's like that. It's too simple. It's too blah, blah, blah. It's too complicated. It's too blah. You always come up with some kind of adjective to say why you don't like it. I quit that. I don't judge. I write it. Now, the skills, yes, that can be evaluated, assessed. Maybe I didn't harmonize it right, or maybe, but to discard the experience of the inspiration, I will never do that. I've done it a few times and I regret it because, again, those are gone. But now I see every little scrap of melody. Sometimes I boom, 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 a little bass line. Oh, cool. I write it down. Like you're doing sound check for a gig. Oh, yeah. And I have these things. They're all like seeds. Like I kept seeds in a greenhouse. So, I'm going to take I got a commission to write a piece for a symphony orchestra. Oh, that bass line right there. I can plant it, and then you let it grow. You apply your skills of orchestration, of harmonization, of, texture writing and density, those concepts that, and then, so a seed can be trained to grow into a shrub or a hedge or a tree or a forest or whatever. So I still use a lot of biological references in my life, as you can see.
Wonderful. Well, and I forgot to preface the beginning of the interview here. We're going to do this for about 45 minutes, about 30 minutes now, and then we'll open things up for questions. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask, and feel free to put them in the comments section as well, and we'll get to as many as we can with the time that we have. And if not, we'll just keep talking, and I will barrage Jovino with tons of questions here. Well, we'll jump around a little bit here. I want to go back. So now here we are in 2021, and jazz, the word jazz means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and very strong opinions one way or the other, for better or worse, not necessarily good or bad. So from the way you started playing piano lessons and then coming at it through a lens of pop and rock, and then going to Canada and being around jazz musicians, and some people say, well, maybe that's kind of a backwards way of looking at it instead of starting with like Louis Armstrong and going forward, and not bad one way or the other.
Yep.
So I'm curious, when you started being in and around jazz musicians and interacting with them, who were some, as a pianist, who were some piano players that you kind of gravitated towards?
Oh, one of the first ones was Chick Corea. Really, I was really enamored with Chick Corea, especially his Return to Forever. All versions of Return to Forever, from the more acoustic one to the more jazz rock kind of one. So that was something I was really interested. And then I heard Keith Jarrett, and I really liked. But there's a lot of Brazilian pianists that also inspired me. People like João Donato, and Jobim himself is a great pianist, and his writing was something that, again, I didn't even know that I knew all this music because I heard it as a kid. So it was there. So now I can go, now I'm actually, as we speak, I'm arranging a beautiful composition of Jobim, an instrumental composition of his for a saxophone quartet in Brazil with an accompanying band with vibraphone, bass, piano, guitar. So I'm having so much fun like digging into Jobim's work. And this is something that I heard way back, but I wasn't aware. But somehow our hard drives record those things. And once I started, oh yeah, I know that song. I know exactly the shape of it, how it goes. It was already there. So this thing about, and I was influenced by a lot of people. I mean, the Chick Corea thing was really important because I started to play with Hermeto, and about 6 months after started to play with him, we got word that we were invited to play this, the first time there was a jazz festival in Brazil. It was 1978 in São Paulo. And they were bringing the top best jazz musicians of the entire world. And of course, Korea was coming. And everybody was there. Dizzy Gillespie and Dexter Gordon, all the people that were considered, oh my God. You know,
Was Wayne Shorter there as well?
And 2 years later,
Okay.
I got to meet Wayne at the Rio Festival, which was in 1980. Okay. And I got to meet Wayne and Jaco Pastorius and Joe Zavino. So that was some of the things. Actually, that was, I have to say that's probably the first like jazz record that really turned me on to the saxophone was Weather Report, especially the Mysterious Traveler, because I was not very fond of saxophone. Somehow I qualified any wind instruments, a horn. And horns for me was like, I liked them with James Brown, you know, but I was not into like, for instance, Stan Getz for me was not somebody that rang the bell. And I eventually ended up playing with Stan Getz and I go, oh my God, this is so cool.
I'm curious now. This is another aside here, but based on the huge success of Stan Getz and the whole bossa nova craze in the late '50s, '60s, what were your opinions as a Brazilian musician when that kind of blew up over here, having such a strong foundation of Brazilian music growing up? What were your opinions about that?
I heard the bossa nova thing as it came out, which was actually a few years earlier, like 58, 59. I remember hearing this music and enjoying it. The radio was very eclectic in Rio at the time, so you could turn one radio station and you could hear that, Jobim and Frank Sinatra and progressive rock. I mean, there was one station could play the diversity of music. So the American acceptance of bossa nova, which in a way catapulted it to the world, didn't mean much to me at that time. But a few years later, like 66, 67, we fell in love with like Sergio Mendes. And so that was something that was a lot more interesting because he had those, it was Lenny Hall and the other girl, two American girls singing in Portuguese with an accent, but with a groove. And that, as a, 12, 13, 14-year-old girl in Brazil, that was so hip. Oh, they're singing my language, but they'd have this funny twist on their... And it was fun, so we used to get together, the kids, in school, and go dance to that music. It was very hip. So it's funny how, the bossa nova thing with Stan Getz and, the Getz Gilberto kind of thing did not really bounce back to me. It was only later that I got to appreciate that. But the Sergio Mendes thing was like, boom.
I'm curious also, too, because I've seen you play not only, piano amazingly well, but I've also seen you play flute and hand percussion and all these other things. When did that stuff start coming into your arsenal of musical output?
Well, it was through Hermeto, because Hermeto plays all these instruments. He's an amazing flute player. He's an amazing pianist. He also plays saxophone and guitar and drums and everything, and all kinds of percussion. So for me, it was a way to learn about phrasing, because I realized that when I was playing piano, a lot of the decisions, like what choices of notes you play, they were not coming from my ears, they were coming from my fingers, because you learn some kind of gestures that they're cool, and they make some cool sounds. So it becomes a very tactile way of playing, which is interesting. I mean, music has that too. You do things which in your instrument require a certain, like, your drummer or your guitarist or whatever you have to do as the sleight of hand to make that sound happen. So that was cool. I was always learning into like new licks to be able to play. But for me, the flute totally changed that, because the flute, it's not that you put your finger there. You put like you hold the G, and you can blow on it, but if you don't hear the G before you blow that, it could be anything. It could be a out of tune G, it could be an octave above or an octave below, because you have to really hear the note. And the best thing, you have to breathe. So with the fingers, you didn't have, so I was into, playing this music that was like endless. Like, and in the end, it was cool, but it was nothing that left a shape in your ears after you hear it. So somebody will ask, oh, how was that? I say, oh, a lot of notes. That's the only thing you can say. Whereas I was really amazed since as a kid as how I would hear something on the radio. And that was my first kind of like questioning as a child. Because I'll hear something on the radio and it's over. And I'll go out walking the street and it's still playing in my head. Yeah. So how come my memory is going? So it's like, where is this music? I mean, it was on the radio. I heard it. But now it's gone. But it's still here. So what makes it stay? And I realized that the power of a beautiful melody is really strong. So for me, it's a long answer, but to start playing the flute was a way to kind of like add breath into my phrases. And now I can say with a lot of certainty that pretty much everything I write, I sing it before I write it. Not because I'm a singer, because I'm a horrible singer, but the tool of the voice is kind of like if I'll be hunting for butterflies, the voice is that net. I couldn't catch the butterfly without the net. So for me, the melodies are there, so my voice is a way to hold it, bring it down, and then I make my fingers follow my voice, and then I can write it down. So the process became, now it comes from this place, this beautiful invisible place, and through the voice to the fingers, from the fingers to the score, and then it goes into the greenhouse and anything can come out of it.
A couple different things. I mean, you've mentioned how, improvising, and you're not the only artist that we've had on here that's mentioned this. I think it's an important thing that improvising and composing are in essence the same thing, coming from the same place. One, you have with composing the opportunity to make changes and edits, and improvising, it's real time, there's no takebacks. I've thought about this a lot in the last few years, particularly doing more writing. Same thing with improvising. I think things that are more memorable are things that are singable. If you have a lot of technique and you're playing all this wonderful stuff, that still is impressive and great. But I think if it's not singable, you're going to lose a lot of people because not everyone's ears are at the same level of being able to hear what you're doing.
That's true. I mean, people get impressed when of course, a musician with a highly, technical skills, highly developed technical skills, is always a beauty to see. Somebody being able to execute a difficult passage cleanly and with all the musical elements. I mean, I would always enjoy that. But as you said, it's not even so much that other people need to keep it. I find that if it's meaningful to me and it comes from that place, people will like it. Of course, not everybody, not all the time. But you have the sense that when people hear this music that's created, and that can be improvised too. I mean, we're just talking about Wayne Shorter. For me, he is one of those musicians. Everything he does, did he write that or he just make that up in the moment? It's like, probably both. Like when his band plays, you don't know where the improvisation begins, where the right rhythm part. With Hermeto, it's the same thing. People listen, they have no idea what parts we are actually exploring, interacting. And because the interaction, for me, it's really about developing the listening, the depth of listening. So if you're playing with other musicians and you're just like, me, what am I doing, what am I doing? So you're not really scouting, scanning the environment. So that's what I love playing with other musicians. That's one thing that I really missed a lot during the pandemic time, is that live interaction. We did a whole bunch of recordings. My quinteto, just before coming here, I was finishing mixing another track for my quinteto that each one of us recorded separately. But when we get into the same room and I can hear what the drummer is doing, and then he inspires me to do something which inspires him to do something in the bass and the elements of awareness, the collective awareness of a band is such a powerful thing that we also know when it's not happening, right? Because sometimes it doesn't happen. But when you have a band, and sometimes it's the people you've played with for 20 years, like in my case, or also, as you said, I travel a lot and end up playing with musicians in different places, different cultures, people who are from so many different environments. So I had so much fun jamming with people from Mali. Or I went to India, did a tour in India with all Indian musicians. I was the only non-Indian. or China, or all the multiple cultures, and jazz too, and New Orleans. So all these places, I love going there and kind of like jumping into the culture, eating the food. Like New Orleans is a thing, Delfeo Marsalis, this is a friend of mine, the trombone player. One of the last time I was in New Orleans, I was actually having dinner. My gig was the next night. So I was already at the place, Snug Harbor, great club in New Orleans. And I'm having dinner. Delfeo walks from the bandstand, comes to my table and says, "Hey man, you want to come and sit in for a tune?" And I said, "Sure." Oh man, yeah. So I left my food and I went to the stage. I ended up playing the 2 sets with them. They didn't let me go. So that was so much fun. I mean, because these guys they have their powerful groove language. And so one thing that my work with Hermeto has given me is the ability for you to tune in, that kind of thing. So you're not approaching them, "Oh, I'm a Brazilian musician. Where's the samba in this thing?" No, I mean, this is a great groove there. This band is smoking. They're playing together. They're so tight. I just want to jump into the mix and just vibe with them. So you basically, the ability to change your wavelength of energy. Sometimes you need to slow it way down. Sometimes you need to speed it up to a lot more than you thought it was possible. So this ability of music to have this, of musicians to be able to tune their wavelength, those are my favorite musicians in the world. People who can do that. And I have nothing against people who only do one wavelength too. Like, I always liked B.B. King, because he never did anything that was not the blues, and I love it. Everything I hear by B.B. King, I go, that's B.B. King. 3 notes, oh, B.B. King. It's like, and he opens his mouth saying B.B. King. It's like, and so that's fine. You don't have to do everything. But for me, like, you don't have to eat all the food of the world. Maybe you grew up with one kind of food, you're going to eat that food for the rest of your life. So I think that people have different personalities. I don't think that everybody should play everything, but I'm kind of voracious in that sense. I'm hungry for music. Like, oh, I want to try that too. If I don't like it, it's okay. I'll pass it next time. But I tried it.
Wonderful. We got plenty of time here, so I want to ask you. I know aside from playing and composing, you're also quite knowledgeable about the history of Brazilian music, and I've seen you do several talks about this. For some people that don't know, I mean, when you talk about samba or bossa nova, many people think that's just one thing. And as you mentioned earlier, you could be in one area and then you could walk over 4 blocks away and they're going to play it entirely differently based on the location. Can you speak to that a little bit and maybe explain that?
I mean, in a way, the good part is that coming from Brazil, because Brazil is like a continental-sized country with a very interesting history. That history has, in a way, I kind of see if you look at the history of the world, you see that somehow there's like a giant funnel over Brazil. So all the influences that had ended up in Brazil from so many different places, in a way, it's unique because of that. There's no other place. First of all, the ethnic mixing, miscegenation. Brazil is the longest ongoing miscegenation project in mankind because we started earlier before everybody else, mixing. So, 1500, there was maybe about 4,000 different Indian communities living in Brazil, native. And then the Portuguese came, but then the Dutch came, and then the French came, and then the British came, and then the people from Portugal, the entire culture from the Middle East. Not only everything from the Arab and Persian cultures, but also from North African, the whole North Africa. All that ended up in the Iberian Peninsula. As a matter of fact, without the Arab algebra, there's no way the Portuguese would have been able to design sails that could make them go around the world. So that was like a continuation of the nomadic spirit of the desert people. Instead of camels, they had these amazing ships. So all that came to Brazil. We got gypsies, we got people from Russia, like the 7-string guitar, which is an essential instrument in samba, comes from Russian gypsies that brought it to Portugal and then to Brazil. And then we have music from the area of India, Pakistan, the kind of like the area of Asia there above. And I see now that I go to India and I play baião, and they go, "Oh, we love this, man. This is like us," And I go, wow. So the ability to have that mix, and of course, American culture, jazz, Broadway, Hollywood, all those things have influenced Brazil a lot, as much as French culture too, poetry, languages, culinary arts. We have a huge like Middle Eastern population in Brazil. So if you do it's kind of like searching for DNA, right? I did that with my DNA. Send a little swab and they tell you your DNA. I am like a huge mixed salad. I have DNA from all over. I love it.
That must be why you like all the different types of music and food.
Probably. I have DNA from Togo, which is like Central Africa. And I have DNA from Greece and Italy and Ireland and England. And it's, wait, it's like a mosaic. And I'm not saying me, I'm unique. I'm saying that in Brazil, probably we are all like that. I have Ashkenazi Jew in my DNA, as well as Central African Togo. I mean, so this blends, I think, that somehow, in some, most people of the world, they are born, raised, they live their lives, and they die within like a 20-mile radius, or not even that, a village. Well, and that's totally cool too. I actually sometimes envy people like this. Oh, imagine what it is to be born, live your whole life, and die within a few blocks. That must be amazing, you know. But somehow my genes are more of the nomadic type, to go somewhere just because you can, and if you cannot, you find a way of going. So I started as young. I was 18 and started to travel. When I came to the United States the first time, just like, you know, not because I was rich and I could spend, but just finding clever ways to make the money, you know, and to make the resources work for that. So I cannot say at all that I'm a very wealthy person. No, I'm not. But I rent my house. Okay, so put it this way: I don't own anything. But the fact that I have the means to go places, and also made me fall in love with languages. My wife is Swiss, and so that combination of cultures. So I go to Switzerland, I'm totally at home. I hang out, you know, the people. Let's eat some raclette or fondue. Climb up to the mountain. I'm there. It's like it's my home. But then I go to Rio. It's also my home. And I come to Seattle. It's also my. So this whole thing that you have to replace your home with somewhere else, it didn't work for me. Not that I was trying, but so it's more that you expand the concept of home. You know, Jobim has a beautiful phrase in one of his songs in which is coming, flying into Rio. He says, "My soul sings, I see Rio from the window of the airplane." I have that too. When I fly into Rio, it's like, oh. But then I fly to Seattle, I also feel that, you know.
Then
So
you see I-5 and you're like, oh.
no, everywhere. I land into London. I love London, man. It's so beautiful. So every time you go to a place, it's like, this is the planet we live in. And I love all cultures. Anything that has like I want to try this thing and the habits and the custom because you eat this thing with that, or you dress this way or that way. For me, that's like, it's all musical.
Well, we still got time before I open things up for questions, which I'm glad because I have more questions for you. So I've read that, like in America, America has jazz, and that's an American thing. And similarly with Brazil and choro music, it's kind of ran parallel in terms of its development. Can you speak of that a little bit for folks that don't know about choro music?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. Actually, right now I'm teaching. Yesterday was the first session of a 3-Saturday choro workshop that's offered by Central in Port Townsend. So yeah, the development of choro reflects that kind of like cosmopolitan, pan-cultural elements of Brazilian culture and life, because it started in the 1800s when the Portuguese court had to flee from Napoleon, and they came to Brazil. They came to Bahia for a couple months, and they came to Rio. So Rio became the seat of an empire. It was not just a colony. Rio in Brazil was, instead of being just a place where the Portuguese took everything away, like they did, it was a place where things started to come to Rio. And because there was a very strong connection of that court by marriage, as you know, the royal houses of the world, they're all relative. So there was a very strong connection with the Habsburgs from Vienna. And in the 1800s, Vienna was like that place. You will be nobody music unless you go to Vienna. And so the bubbling of cultural music, Mozart, Beethoven, everybody. And so a lot of this Austrian guy started to come to Rio. He came right after to teach music to the kids of the court because they had to have European education in the tropics. So he brought a whole bunch of stuff. He wrote the rondo form. And then soon after, that was early 1800s. So, but later, second half of 1800s, you have like the famous dances, the polka, the mazurka, the waltzes, the xote, all the dance. There was a craze in Europe, all over, people dancing, eventually the habanera. So that started to come to Brazil too. We had a lot of musicians coming from like Bulgaria, Romania, to play music, like classical, violin players, flute players. But they also had a way to play this thing. So the polka played by people of African descent in Brazil, it's not a Hungarian or Polish polka. It already has, so that is the origin of choro music. It's basically a very Afro-Brazilian accent on playing music from Europe. So that's really hip. So you're playing polkas, mazurkas, but now it sounds like choro. And it wasn't even called choro until the 1900s. They wanted to call it, there were more refined names. They call them tangos, or Brazilian tangos, or just simply polkas. But they were very different. They were not like the other polkas. So the piano became a very central element in that music because the piano was traded with the British. The Portuguese and the British were allied against Napoleon and the French. So the British started to dump pianos in Brazil. It was the country of pianos. They were cheap. Anybody could have one. You didn't have to have money. And the easy pianos, they have a professional piano mover, like 6 guys who work as a team, and they sang a song together to keep, so they could walk carrying the piano. I mean, it's amazing that the piano mover songs, so they could synchronize their steps, going up a hill full of rocks and holes, so they could it's like a ATV, right? Bringing a piano. So that kind of cultural thing made it that the parlor choro was centered around the piano. So a lot of composers wrote for the piano exclusively because it was the education of ladies. You had to learn how to cook, to sew, to play the piano, to entertain, blah, blah, blah. So that part. And then the other part was the portable choro of all those musicians who suddenly were bringing clarinets, flutes, violins, mandolins, all kinds of the ophicleide. Do you remember the ophicleide? It's like an old horn. It's a brass with keys. Brass. It looks like about the size almost of a baritone. I mean, the bass ophicleide. And that instrument is so powerful into creating like contrapunto. So there was music. There was Baroque music in Brazil at the same time as Baroque music in Germany. There was the Brazilian Baroque and the German Baroque with lots of similarities. Sacred music, the Catholic thing brought all the sacred music. So that was part, and also brought the carnival. So with the festivities, so that pretty much brought us into the 20th century. With choro from being its own thing, it became the background to all the popular music. So you hear the samba singers, the background is choro. But now you add in more things. So choro you can play backwards. You can play like a choro from 1865, and it sounds so totally modern because now you can apply all the rhythmic developments. So that is something that I've totally have fun researching. I'm doing that every day. I'm just listening to it. Oh, well, look at that. And I put it into my repertoire of things to teach when I'm teaching the history classes. So it's something that I didn't think was really important, especially because of learning from Hermeto Pascoal. You don't start at the bottom, you start at the very top. So now I have to find my way to the very origins of this music and see the beauty in that instead of just, that's old school, that's horrible. Now it's modern. So you understand that Hermeto played a lot of that music when he started too. So it's a way to recreate an experience that's not mine because it's not even my generation. But now I'm listening to a lot of music from the 1940s in Brazil. And it's like, oh my God, that's so cool. And you think about the production, how they record this thing. There's no overdubs and all this thing. And how try to imagine the band set up when you hear these recordings. The singer or the percussion, where did they put them? So it makes life fun.
So I'm curious, you're composing every day. You're doing the jazz, not the history, the research stuff for your classes. You're preserving Hermeto's music. You're teaching all these classes. How do you fit that all in a day? I mean, how do you budget your time?
It's intuitive, just like everything else. Some days you wake up. Like last night, I was just, what am I going to do? So I actually working on this Jobim arrangement. So I decided to actually learn the piece. So I sat and I diving into this music by Jobim and starting to prepare. So when I'm going to make the arrangement, now it's not going to come from notes on a page. It's going to come from my understanding of the shape of the music and everything. And this morning I was mixing something for my quinteto. And then I still have time to have fun, just spend a week with our grandkids, so that's a lot of fun. You become again 5 years old, 8 years old, 4 years old. It's great. The linear nature of time makes us think that at my age, which is 66, you cannot be 9 years old. But you hang out with a kid that's 9 years old, and you go, oh, that's when I was with 9 years old. So you kind of tune into that vibe. It's another way of adjusting the wavelength. But it always makes you feel better, because when we hang out with the kids, and that's one reason why I love teaching so much, because you work with the new generations, and you get inspired by them. So for me, working, say, at Cornish with my ensembles there, in which I had to write arrangements for the ensembles, it was totally inspiring. I go home with something that I could use for my own work, because it was born in this, the friction creates the heat and the spark and that kind of stuff.
Wonderful. Well, we're at that time now. Are there any questions? Looks like there are questions. Hang on one second.
Maybe it's Chuck asking the question.
Let's see. So the question is, I see a lot of parallels between the combinations of cultures in Brazil and Cuba. In Cuba, the Spanish all over Spain, French from Haiti, slaves from Congo and West Africa, Taino natives. What do you think, Jovino? I think of these places as energy centers that are unique.
I totally agree. The culture of the island of Cuba is one of the most powerful and strong in the world, exactly because of those elements that you listed. And it's amazing, actually, that within an island, that much diversity. If you go to the Oriente, go to Guantanamo, you go to each city, Santiago and Havana. I have never been to Cuba, unfortunately. I still plan to go. Chucho has invited me a couple of times, but it never came to happen. So what happens is that if you can think that Cuba, instead of being an island, would be a nation of dimensions. So the thing with Cuba is that because it was an island, everything kind of turned into itself. I mean, all these influences, all the Haitian culture, the same kind of Nigerian Ifa religion that created Santeria in Cuba, creates Candomblé in Brazil. But because Cuba is an island and the native people got decimated, it was the first place right there where Columbus came on the island next door. And very soon the Indians all died because of disease and cultural decimation. In Brazil, that didn't happen so much because you could actually, as a slave in Brazil, run away from the farm and join a community of other runaway slaves in the middle of nothing, the middle of the country, where nobody could come and find you. So we had independent African communities living. The longest lasting was 95 years, called quilombos, in which African culture living in, and because also, ecologically speaking, the landscape, the vegetation, the fauna, the climate regimen of Western Africa and Brazil, remember they used to be together, they just split later. It's like two grand pianos. So the people who came from Africa, millions, more slaves came to Brazil than anywhere else in the world. And not just from one place, but from Western Africa. A lot of slaves came from the north part of Africa. And these were slaves that were already completely literate, people who read the Quran, and they were they were fluent in the written and spoken language, places that had universities. They come to Brazil to work for a plantation owner that doesn't know how to write his name. So you can see that land of contrast that we see still today. Brazil right now, being one of the most culturally active countries in the world, is just an absolute disaster when it comes to dealing with the pandemic. There's no way you can even explain it or justify it except by human stupidity, but I won't go too much into that.
All right, do we have any other questions? No questions yet. Okay. If we still have plenty of time, so if you have questions, let us know, and we'll happy to get to them here. So I know that you're very active in, well, before I ask this, I want to get to the pandemic. Everyone's been kind of, sheltering in place, not working as much, but you've been quite active teaching and getting a lot of online resources and programs happening. Can you speak about those things a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this is something, it's kind of like you're playing a solo in a tune, and then the harmony modulates to a different key, and it was unexpected. You were in the key of G major, now in the key of B major. And you go, oh, so you have to change the adaptability, the flexibility, the reflex. Something happening, and instead of going, oh, let me think about that, let me form a committee to talk about what we're going to respond to this situation. It's like, boom, no, what committee? No, this is it. You respond by reflex. Just like when you put your hand on a hot stove, go, oh, you don't have time to think. It hurts. No, I don't want that. So in a way, the pandemic hitting was something that caught me and the whole universe by surprise. So I always wanted to teach certain topics related to the music of Brazil. I always wanted to give this kind of like global vision. And I know that many people wanted to learn about that, but I was never really able to find that in any place, because either you have to conform to their syllabi and instructions and form, and this is what we do. And then I was already doing this at college with my ensembles. I had total freedom. What do I want to teach? Well, let me see. I have 5 singers and 2 flute players and a harpist. Okay, let's find some music that's going to fit. So that spontaneity was already there. But when it comes to teaching things like history, and you always have to follow somebody else's divisions. So I decided to create my own, and that didn't take a lot of preparation. Within maybe 2 weeks, I started my first class. And since then, I've had maybe, I think it's probably getting close to 300 people now that have taken my class. It's not the same number, because a lot of them come back. And they're also not just this demographics of either high school kids or college kids or retired people or professional musicians. You get everything. I have like Fred Hirsch taking my classes, which is, I'm a big fan of it. And then he comes and takes my classes from me. It's a big honor. And musicians from all over. I got now guitarists from Sweden waking up at 4 a.m. to take my 7 p.m. class here because he wants to. He said it's worth it. And some people who take it again and again because they like it. So this kind of thing has actually gotten to the point where, number one, I have to be creative. I repeat some classes. The Brazilian music history class, I've done it 5 times already. But now I'm a little hiatus, and maybe sometimes I can kind of let it brewing a little bit, can pull it back into the... And the Hermeto Pascoal class, I've done it 3 times. And then I do specific styles. I've done one on choro. I've done one on forró. I've done one on samba. And I also have listening sessions, so people can... We listen for 2 hours to one record that I was involved in the production. So I can tell the stories about, and then this happened, and then and we'll have recordings of the rehearsal that led to the, or a live version of the same tune, so that we played. So that, and technologically, that's one thing that I'm fortunate, because some years ago this would have been impossible. I can sit in my studio home, and I can talk, and I can, oh, check out this video. Now listen to this, watch this score, and I can kind of pull everything in. So that ability for me, it fit with my kind of like mercurial nature, which is to be, it was an issue in music because you need discipline, right? So I didn't have that when I started to play. I was like, okay, play a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit. I thought I played guitar. A little bit of guitar, yeah. But everything was like, what do you call it? Jack of all trades, master of none. So Hermeto kind of taught me that dog training thing. The dog wants to run, and you go, sit. Sit, no, wait. And the dog is crazy to run. So no, it's not ready yet. Still got to shed more of that piece, Oh, it's good. No, it's not. So that, in a way, developed that side that I did not have. So you learn, now that I have to like do something like transcribing these pieces that I'm doing right now, I know it's going to be hours and hours and hours and hours, and more hours probably until I, so to have that patience to kind of like the, what do you call, the patience of the orchard, you know, because you plant the orchard, you're going to eat those apples until the tree's so big. So it's the two sides of it. I still love the flash of the moment, but also having the discipline to build something.
But aside from the larger classes, you also are still teaching privately. If someone wanted to study with you privately, they could do that as well.
Yep. I usually, as a private teacher, I never tell my students, okay, I'm going to see you every week, or I'm going to see you like every month. Or we usually have one lesson, and depending on the student, it might be a lot of playing, or it could be not playing at all. I have a really a guy that I really enjoy teaching. He's an older guy, plays piano, very nice, in California. And every once in a while, he buys like a bundle of lessons. And our lessons are more like philosophical conversations about music. But then I still show something, you know, this voicing. He asked me, he wants me to film my hand doing it and send it to him. But so that kind of thing can be highly, for me, it's like a stimulus, inspiration to do things. So, but some other people is really more. I have like flute students, composition students, students to learn about improvisation, about tools for improvisation. And it's all fun, you know, I mean, so in a way I'm busy, but because I can make my own schedule, I like that. I said, okay, last week we're going to be in Oregon. And so move things around, you know, we can do that. And then, or if I want, now this kind of thing that I'm doing, I can do it anywhere. Oh, sorry, I'm in South Africa. The class meets next Thursday.
So if people want to find more information about how to study with you or get involved with your programs, how can they do that?
Well, having a name like Jovino Santos Neto helps. If I'll be John Brown, they say, just find me on the internet, John Brown. So if you Google my name, you're probably going to come up with a whole bunch of things. Hopefully not in police records or anything like this. But it would probably land up on my site or a Facebook page or one of those platforms. You know, we're there. Hopefully, try not to get caught in the maelstrom, in the whirlpool there. But at least we're there enough to share, not just my own things, but also the stuff that I think is cool. I just shared Nina Simone the other day. Oh my God, she's so good. I just loved it. You know, it's like, you know, it's beautiful.
Any other questions? Nope, not yet. Okay, so before we wrap up here, we're almost out of time. For those of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. One more question for you, Jovino. Here you are, 2021, and you've had a vast career in music, working with tons of great artists and writing your own music. And if you were going to give advice to people that were upcoming musicians or wanting to become musicians, what are some things that you've learned over the years that you found to be very helpful that you would impart upon them to help them grow and get to where they want to go?
It's a great question. I think that the number one skill that I would recommend everybody to develop, because most of us don't have it, and that skill is to turn off the judge. So every time you start to play something or do something, whatever it is, anything, it could be you're cooking dinner or you're writing a book or you're playing music or you learn. The moment you start, especially those of us musicians, because we are doing a lot of what we do is ephemeral. It's on stage. We play an improvisation, then that's your shot at doing that thing. So when you turn on, which is normal, you have some kind of a policeman doing an interrogation. Can I see your license and registration, please? What were you doing at the... And then you start to have all this kind of qualitative assessments of what you're doing. In other words, this sucks. Oh, no, this is amazing. I'm so good. Or I'm horrible. I'm the best musician. I'm the worst musician. And you start to immediately compare yourself. What would Keith Jarrett do? Like all this kind of thing. You try to put all this, your role models, you know, your idols, trying to see through what you think are their eyes looking at you. So that stuff is just a big waste of time. If you can learn to turn that off. And not because you won't judge, of course you will. Afterwards, you can go and assess, give yourself a grade or whatever. It just doesn't happen to do it at the same time you play music. So assessing music is a good skill. Playing music is a good skill. Assessing music while you play music is not a good skill. That's simple as this. Now, give the judge some vacation time. He will come back, don't worry. And just enjoy playing. So the concept of play is great. We already say the kids play. So when we play, we should be like kids playing. In Portuguese, play music, we say tocar, which means to touch. So to touch music is also good. To play with music is great. So that's basically the thing. If anytime you find yourself kind of veering away from that, am I having fun? Is this, I mean, maybe working hard like crazy, like, oh, but it's still having fun because you can see the development. And music, the development is never, there's no overnight success in music. That one day you don't know anything about harmony, the next day you know everything about it. Nobody knows everything about harmony. So it's for everybody that joins the path. The good thing to know is that there's not like a big wall at the end that says, okay, this is your accomplishment. Now you are whatever, a professor or a master or a doctor. Or so. That doesn't work because the next day a 13-year-old is going to come, it's going to blow you away out of the water because, oh my God, how can you do this thing? Because that's the nature of it. You know, people come, and so I get inspired by that. When I see somebody like that come so good, I say, I want to play with him. I want to hang out and just, absorb, get into that vibe. The wavelength it keeps you alive, makes you feel young, even though you're not.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jovino, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you, and we look forward to playing some music with you. For those of you who have been watching us online here, hope you've enjoyed the interview. We're going to take about an hour break here to get the instruments set up and do a brief, very short rehearsal and play some music for you. If you find value in these interviews that we're doing and the performances every single week, feel free to make a donation to support us either via Venmo or PayPal, or you can also mail a check, and all that information is on the beginning of this post here. But thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be right back shortly.